American capital city does not have the water to bathe children, to cook, or even flush the toilets. The water hasn't been drinkable for weeks, and now for most residents, there's almost none at all. Years-long water problems have reached crisis in Jackson, Mississippi. The governor declaring a state of emergency, the White House monitoring, the president briefed and ready to offer help. The National Guard called out because some 180,000 people are in the middle of a third world-like hell. They've been under a boil water order for a month, but now faucets are mostly dry. What does trickle out can't be consumed, and there's not even an estimate for when the water system will be back up and properly working. The crisis after heavy rain and flooding from the Pearl River, flooding that the mayor says overwhelmed the main water treatment plant. But make no mistake, this crisis is years in the making. Today we learned from the reporting of the Mississippi Free Press, a nonprofit media outlet, that the water plant has had critical staffing shortages, and according to the EPA, there's no evidence the city even tried to fill the positions. In 2015, inspectors found lead in Jackson water, and in February of last year, an ice storm left tens of thousands of Jacksonians with no water for a month in the middle of the pandemic. Now, water system failure. The schools are closed, virtual learning only. Many restaurants and stores shuttered, offices empty, families scrambling.
Look, I can't wash my hands.
People in Jackson, Mississippi are being told to shower with their mouths closed because they don't have access to clean water.
Gotta do what you gotta do.
So what do racism and profit-based interests have to do with a crisis like this? For starters, when water infrastructure was first being built in the U.S., only the rich could afford to get it. Running water utilities is still a money-making business 200 years later. You see, even though most water systems are owned by local governments, private companies are usually doing the work to treat, repair, and maintain them. In Jackson, that contractor was a company called Siemens. It turned out to be such a bad deal for the city that Jackson won a nearly $90 million settlement over Siemens' botched work. But the roots of this crisis run much deeper. When Mississippi was finally forced to desegregate schools in 1970, white people left for the suburbs and took tax revenue with them. Today, you've got a city that is largely black, with a quarter of people living in poverty, and a crumbling water service that's been neglected for years.
This just in, Baltimore, Maryland becomes yet another majority black city without access to clean drinking water. On Monday, Baltimore's DPW announced in a series of tweets that E. coli matter had been found in Baltimore City Council District 9. For the past 2 days, Baltimore has been collecting and testing samples from Baltimore City and Baltimore County to make sure that other areas have not been affected by E. coli. This is a map of Baltimore. If you are within the black dotted line, you are in the affected areas where E. coli was found. Authorities are asking Baltimoreans in those affected areas to switch over to bottled water if you can. But if you absolutely have to use tap water, you must boil your water for at least 2 minutes before using it to drink, bathe, or cook with. If you happen to live in the affected areas, every day until the situation is resolved, starting at 9 a.m., your household can pick up a maximum of 3 gallons of water from any of these 3 locations. Now, moving more into my opinion on the matter. This is a story that is very near and dear to my heart because I live in Baltimore City. And while I live over east and the situation is happening over west, my family has roots on the west side. West Baltimore is majority black and has some of the highest poverty rates in the city. Majority black and brown cities all across the country desperately need to repair their infrastructure. I mean, there are water mains in Baltimore City that predate the Civil War. Environmental racism is a serious problem that is in desperate need of attention from our president and funding from our government. It doesn't matter if you live in Flint, the 9th Ward, Jackson, Mississippi, or the west side of Baltimore City. You deserve to have access to clean drinking water.
Nobody should have water that they can't drink and have to pay for it. Nobody should have contaminated water. This is America. This should not be happening to any community.
But Benton Harbor isn't alone. The Natural Resources Defense Council, an environmental group, estimates some 22 million Americans, most in the Midwest and Northeast, may be getting their drinking water, at least in part, from lead pipes.
They are concentrated in these older communities, which also are disproportionately where we have more vulnerable populations, people who are poor, and predominantly people of color.